Hi, I'm Joanne Murphy. Welcome to Try Talking Sport, a podium podcast for athletes, adventurers and endurance enthusiasts. Welcome to episode 12 of Try Talking Sport. In this show, I am joined by former professional rugby player Damian Browne from Galway, who now takes extreme adventure challenges in his stride. Playing professional rugby for 16 years, retiring at the age of 35, he set himself some ambitious adventures to achieve before turning 40. In this episode, we chat about Damian's life as a professional rugby player, his completion of the Marathon des Sables in 2016, and his rowing of the Atlantic in 2017. He is currently undertaking the challenge to complete the 7 summits of the world, with just 2 of these left to complete in 2020. Setting big scary goals and devising his own training plans to complete them, there are some fabulous nuggets and insights into how his mindset, determination, resilience and attitude have been central to his success as an athlete and adventurer. Damian, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Great you could join us this morning, bright and early. You have been on one hell of an adventure since I spoke with you last back in 2017 before you set off on your Atlantic rowing adventure crossing the ocean. I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to since that time, which seems like so long ago.
Morning, Joanne. Thanks for having me. I suppose the best place for me to start is that, I'm born and bred here in Galway, the west of Ireland, and I went to school in the Bish in town, and I was lucky enough to come out of the Bish in 1998 and straight into professional rugby. That wouldn't really happen nowadays, but because at that time there just wasn't a whole lot of depth, and rugby was only professional for 3 or 4 years, there wasn't many players around really, and I suppose they saw this big lump of a young fella from Renmore, and I kind of got thrown in at the deep end and fast tracked, and very lucky and privileged to do that for the next 16 years. After that, I went on a bit of a journey, even in my rugby career. Played here for Connacht for 5 years, signed for Northampton Saints in England, played there for 4 years, amazing club, amazing history, and after that, I moved out to France for 3 years for a club called Brief. Loved that experience, although the rugby or the day-to-day rugby environment was very frustrating at times. But the experience of living in France, learning a new language, and I suppose just embracing a new culture was really cool and one I really enjoyed. Came back and played 2 years in Leinster, involved in an amazing group of not only players but coaches, strength and conditioning staff, medical staff, during a very successful time for them. And then unfortunately had a big shoulder injury there that ended up meaning that I lost my contract and went searching again for a new club, and ended up out in France again and finished up in France in a club called Oyonnax in the top 14. A really small club, kind of on a very small budget, a town of like 22,000 people, 15,000 of those who went to the games on a Friday and Saturday. So basically the whole town was obsessed with rugby. 2 good years out there, but again, unfortunately, I was like on my 16th year professionally at that stage, and my body was just hanging in there, to be honest. I'd, play a game on a Saturday and I wouldn't train again till a Wednesday. That sort of kind of state took so long to recover, and ended up getting a knee injury that just couldn't overcome, and retired in 2015. And then to kind of fast forward a little bit, I always had a plan after rugby that there was certain things I wanted to do in my life. So I suppose I've always been a fan of goals, or maybe very goal orientated, or even institutionalized by the kind of goal setting nature of rugby. And I kind of reverted back to some of my goal lists, 1 year, 5 year, lifetime goals, and I put together a new list, and it was basically entitled "Before I'm 40, I Will," and there was 6 or 7 different endings to that sentence. And the first one of those that I decided to focus on was the Marathon des Sables, which was it's a 250. Well, my year was a 257 kilometer ultra foot race across the Sahara Desert over 6 days. So kind of the equivalent of 6 marathons in 6 days, self-supported. carrying everything you need on your own back to survive that period. And then I completed that, and then when I saw you, getting back to where we started, when I saw you in 2017, I had committed to the second sentence of that, before I'm 40 I will, and that was to row across the Atlantic.
I noticed the way you say sentence and not bucket list.
Yeah, I don't really see it as, I never really saw it as a bucket list as such, because I do have other kind of lifetime goals around that aren't on that list, so it's kind of just for this period. I retired at 35 years old, and I kind of gave myself 5 years till I was 40 to do these things that I was absolutely fascinated by, and I saw a lot of purpose in them for me. So
you went from rugby to running to rowing, and now, I mean, you must class yourself as like a serious adventurer, because the Seven Summits is your next big challenge.
I'm highly uncomfortable with the label, but I understand that there's a game to be played in a certain way around this sort of stuff. So I do kind of reluctantly take the label of adventurer. But yeah, for me, the whole purpose behind these things are more like, if you think about, your life in general, and at some stage you're going to look back on it, and what have you done and what have you completed that are important to you, so these things bring great purpose for me. I want to look back and go, I gave it my best shot. That was pretty cool. I did some amazing things, saw some incredible parts of the world. I was brave enough to kind of put myself into situations that scared me. So, these things, my fascination and my passion behind them came through rugby, learning. I was never the fittest guy, but I always worked really hard, and I felt I worked really hard at my game and getting better. And the harder I worked and the more I put into it, the better I got. And that kind of cycle is quite addictive, So as I was going through rugby, I was discovering, looking for ways that other people were doing that outside of rugby in different environments. And, that's where I picked up the Mountain des Sables. I saw a documentary by the trio Donovan brothers here in Galway, Richard and his two brothers who did it. I was still playing Connacht at the time, and I said, someday I'm going to do that. It just really appealed. And the same with the Atlantic Row. I read a book called The Crossing by James Cracknell and Ben Fogle in 2006. And I knew as much misery as they poured into every page, I was like, this is for me. Like, the adventure and the extremes and the challenge of it all just really appealed to that kind of person who I was becoming, who was learning that there was amazing rewards from challenging themselves.
And how do you prepare? Like, I know you know your body inside out, you know how to maximise the potential of your body, to deal with injury, to deal with fueling it, recovery, everything. But how do you go from playing rugby at such a high level and then turning yourself into a runner? I mean, you are a big guy, you're a big player. How do you turn yourself into somebody who can sustain running 6 marathons in 6 days? But not only that, but spend, was it 63 days, 6 hours and 25 minutes on the water for the Atlantic Row?
So my big advantage when it comes to all these things is that I've been preparing my body and my mind for 16 years in a very, very, very intense and demanding environment, So I've learned to understand it very well, and I've been very lucky with the people I've been surrounded by as well. Obviously, these guys are, world class in some cases. So, picked up a lot from them, and I picked up a lot from watching other guys and what they do, guys I respect. So when I came out of it, that was something that I was really comfortable doing myself. So I suppose the question you're asking is, or the answer to the question you're asking is, you have to be fit for purpose, right? Now, I have to take into account hugely my profile and my body's profile and what it's been through and the injuries I've had and the compensations I have due to playing rugby for 16 years. So if we take the Mountain des Sables, for example, there's no way I could have gone down a program of an ultra running preparation phase, because I'm I walk around roughly 120 kilos. So I wouldn't have even made the start line, and if I did, I would have been a shell of the man, and I would have given myself no chance, right, to have any chance of finishing what I wanted to do or achieving what I wanted to do. So I have to kind of almost fabricate a program around that, So believe it or not, okay, so believe it or not, the longest I ran in my preparation for the Mountain des Sables without stopping in my prep was 2 kilometers. No, that seems absolutely bananas, right? But there's other ways to build. So basically what you're trying to do in any kind of program, especially endurance, is just build volume, right? There's other ways to do that. You don't have to do it in long blocks. You can shorten the actual work pace, the work piece, and increase the intensity, but build your volume that way. So I just did a lot of interval running because I run much better. I won't run much more fluidly at what would you say?
A faster pace.
A faster pace, exactly, yeah. So if I was just plodding along, building my volume through kind of slow pieces, I just would have loaded up all those joints that were already really compromised. I have no cartilage in either knee, basically. I have issues with my hips and all that, just from rugby, it absolutely batters you. The French call it an abattoir, a boucherie, an abattoir.
So how did you create your program then? I mean, it seems absolutely insane that you would run 6 marathons in 6 days and the longest run you would do is 2 kilometers. I actually would love to know what your training program looks like.
So I reverse engineered from the start, from the day I wanted to stand on the start line right back to the point I was at. If I remember correctly, with the MDS, it was something like 189 days. It was like 6 months or 7 months or something like that before when I actually started my program. And because I was coming off a knee injury from rugby, and I was only 6 months retired at this stage, so I was still unsure. I hadn't run in 6 months. I was still unsure if my knee could sustain any what would you say, load through it. So my first session was just up on the pitches in Renmore. I basically travelled for 6 months after I finished, and then came back and then started preparations, and I just went up to the pitches in Renmore, and I was just testing out my knee. So all I did was a few strides to like 22 metre line or the 25 on the GA pitches there, and just to see, and I just started building it up slowly and building my volume, and then when I was pretty confident that I was in a good place, I'd lost quite a bit of weight at that stage as well, a little bit of weight from rugby, so I was 116 or 17 kilos, but I did a lot of off-heat conditioning to complement the running piece, and then I did a lot of work on the ergometer, on the watt bike, and on the a thing called Airdyne, or a air assault bike, and then I did a lot of strength work around that as well, resistance work in the gym. So
basically on upper and lower body, across like a whole body conditioning kind of program. Yeah,
the upper body stuff was basically just to give my lower body a break at times and to keep doing some sort of training, So I think I was working in 9-day blocks for the vast majority of that program, and I'd only run every 9 days, believe it or not. Yeah, so now we have to take into account my ambition here as well. I wasn't going to win the Mountain des Sables, So like that program obviously would have been, terrible if I was going to actually win it. I was just going to complete it. And coming from where I was and my profile, this program worked really well, So when I got to the start line, I was in really strong mental and physical condition. There was no wear and tear. I'd peaked, if you get me, and I felt that was my best chance of completing the Mountain des Sables.
Plus, you've also had 16 years of training under your belt as well as a professional athlete, so that has to stand for something, even though you only ran 2K as your longest run. I mean, you knew your body, you knew what would work, you knew what wouldn't work.
Exactly, yeah. I was very conscious that, like, at the end of my career, I suppose that you've been running around pitches for that long, every day, and you realise that, like, it's actually having a detrimental effect, all that running, just because I'm not moving very well anymore. I'm so stiff in certain areas, that it's all that kind of what would you say, all that load and pressure has been dumped somewhere into a joint where it should be more than likely been absorbed by a muscle. Just because, you think about your ankle, everything's so important in the chain, right up from, ankle mobility, hip mobility, thoracic spine. So mine was just all stiff because, like, if you think of 16 years of rugby, just constantly hammering each other, constantly, every day in training, in the gym, the poundages you're lifting, everything just you become really, really stiff. So by the end of it, I was running really poorly. So I was very aware as well that, I would have to have to do the Mountain de Sable, things would have to change. I just couldn't run too much, if that makes any sense to people.
And how did you recover between the sessions then? Because you're still obviously working your body very hard. So were you getting like a regular sports massage? Were you going for physio? How were you minding your body and protecting it? Other than not running, how were you protecting it physically?
Yeah, so I do a lot of work around that sort of stuff. So I think your ready to train period before you train is really important. People might call it a warm up. I call it ready to train. And then your future prep, or your warm down, so thinking about what's next, so putting time into when you're finished a session. I call it future prep, because I'm looking forward to the next session and what can be kind of opened up and what can be the compensation taken away from what you just finished, to give yourself the best window to get the most out of the next training session. So those two periods are really important. And then around that, I'm a big fan of colds, ice baths and the ocean and getting into the ocean. Now I will admit that there's only certain times of the year that the ocean is cold enough to really have a quality effect on your recovery. But at the same time, I find it really good mentally. So I'm always in and out of the ocean. Ice baths are good. And then, I'd see a guy kind of, I suppose, whenever I felt like I needed to see him, because now that I'm not a professional rugby player, I have to pay for that sort of stuff. So I wasn't overusing go down to Kevin Craddock down in Craddock Performance in Lisbon, who I'd know for years, and he'd get stuck into me, and I needed that at times, again, coming back to kind of what my body's been through and the state it's in now.
So to go from April 2016 for the Marathon des Sables to then decide that you were going to give yourself 18 months to be on the start line for the Talisker Whisky Challenge, how did you change from being a runner? If we can call you a runner. Well, you completed it. You're an athlete. At the end of it all, you're still an athlete. Labels or no labels. How did you then transfer your skill set, your mindset, your body, everything into rowing?
I was a lot happier to ditch the running, I must say, and just kind of concentrate everything on off-feet conditioning and strength work. Again, the same process again, I reverse engineer right from the start, and I know exactly that it was 588 days before I was meant to take to the start line of the Talisker row that I started my prep, and I just break it down into blocks. I can't remember what the first block was. It was probably something like 6 months or something. And then I break that down into blocks of 8 weeks, and then start kind of put together a program. But it was a really long period to try and prepare for one thing and to keep my kind of focus and, I suppose, what would you say, intensity as high as I wanted it to be, or I would demand of myself.
And had you rowed at all previously?
I went out with my only rowing experience was I went out one day with Gav Hennigan, who rowed the Atlantic the year before me. I went out with him on the boat, and that was it. I'd never rowed, but ocean rowing is very different to river rowing and Olympic rowing, in that, like, one of them is incredibly technical and skilled, and the other one is, like, to quote John Daly, grip it and rip it. There's good chance that both oars, or one oar, will be out of the water most times you give it a swing at it, especially when you're out in the middle of the Atlantic. It's just because the boat's always at different angles and you're very reactive to what the conditions are doing to the boat. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that, like, you pick it up very quickly, and the finesse, or no, finesse is the wrong word, enough what you need to know. You pick it up within 3 hours, and then you get better and better slowly, and you realise that obviously technically it can help. If you're technically more proficient, it can help, but like over the course of like 63 days, it's not a huge, it's not something you put a massive amount of concentration into pre-row.
So what was a typical day like out on the ocean? Wet,
blue, So the first two...
I'm sorry, you couldn't swim either. Sure you couldn't?
No, I can't swim, no.
Yeah, that's important to note there. I remember that from before. You can't swim.
No.
Can you swim now?
Wasn't planning on swimming, but no, I can't swim yet. Someday definitely I'll learn.
How did you clean the boat?
You just tie on. So basically, I was wearing a harness at all times when I was on the boat, and then I just tie on the harness to these things called grab lines down the side of the boat. So it's three-way line. So there's 2 clips on the boat, 1 clip on me, and then I kind of just shuffle around, and the boat keeps moving. So you're just kind of getting pulled along. It's not that I can't, like, I can swim maybe, like, I can swim at like 20 meters, and then it's sinking very quickly. But I was apart from that first day when I sat on the side of the boat and checked those 3 clips were tight about 16 times each, I was pretty comfortable after that once I got in the water. But that plunge took a little bit of courage, I must say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So come back and tell me what it was like a typical day out on the ocean.
So
because we can't understand. We can never understand what it's like to do that.
So I'll start with when I had steering, because the 2 days are very different. So I lost my complete system steering failure on day 17. So before that, a day looked something like, I think I would get up around 5 or 6 in the morning, and then I would row until about 10 o'clock. Roughly, and then I'd take a break and have something to eat. Sorry, before I started rowing, I'd have a shake, like a protein and carbohydrate shake with some creatine, and then I would row for like the next kind of 3 to 4 hours, and then I would take a break to have some breakfast. I'd eat that for about half an hour, and then I'd be back on the oars from kind of 10:30 to about 12:30, 2 hours, and then I'd take an hour off to have lunch and a bit of a break, and then I'd row from 2 o'clock, so say an hour and a half. So at 2 o'clock to 4, and then I'd take another break for an hour, and that was kind of the hottest part of the day, around 4, 5, 6. So I'd take an hour off there and try and get some rest, and then I'd get back on the oars at 5, and I'd row to 9 o'clock, but I'd take a break around 7 for like 30 minutes to have some dinner. And these, when I say breakfast, lunch and dinner, all that means is just boiling up some water quickly, putting it in a bag of dehydrated stuff and scoffing it. And then around 9 o'clock, I'd take another break for an hour, and I was kind of I really liked that break because I'd go in, I'd turn on the sat phone, I'd get some text messages, I might even make a phone call or receive a phone call, and then I'd come back out on the oars, and I'd row until midnight, and then I'd make a kind of decision really based on the conditions, if I'd row for another hour or 2 or get a nice block of sleep, which was at best 6 hours, and I'd row and I'd kind of get back up again at 6. And when I lost my steering, the only thing that changed was the night time. So when I'd go in at 9 and I'd put on the sat phone, I'd come back out at 10. This got really dependent on conditions and what the moon was doing, because when I lost my steering system, it meant I had to steer with the oars. So when you steer with the oars, you're very reactionary to what the waves are doing and where you're placing the oars to compensate for the movement of the waves on the boat. So I would, if there was no moonlight, I couldn't see, basically. I could just about see you. You're about a metre from me now. I couldn't see like 2 metres from me. It was pitch black.
Were you ever scared?
Not really. I was not scared as such, no. There was some times out there where it was very hairy. Like I had a double capsize one day. Nearly got hit by a cargo ship another day. So actually that was pretty scary. The cargo ship part was pretty scary.
Did you ever think you were going to die?
No,
it's not.
No. I think once the biggest factor, and like a question I always ask myself is, what can stop me achieving these things? And the biggest factor, and the thing that could have stopped me, was losing contact with the boat. So as long as I always had that harness and I was clipped into the boat, I always had one point of contact with the boat. Even if something freak happened, I always felt pretty secure. Like you could hang a car off that. There's a line called the jackstay, that you clip into, and you could, no matter how much, as long as you're buying quality equipment, right, no matter how much kind of force the Mother Nature can throw up, you should be pretty safe. So I felt secure anyway at most times. But
so go back to the steering then.
So
you couldn't see at night, so you were.
I couldn't see, so basically that just meant that I didn't know where to place the oars, so I'd get it kind of right one time in like 10 or 20. I'd get the placement right just because I couldn't see where I was putting it. So when you don't get it right, those other 19 out of 20 times, you either get the oar either kind of rebounds badly either into your shin or into your quad, or worst of all, you get the butt of it into your ribs. And there's only so long you can kind of sustain that. After about 25 minutes of that, you're like, screw this. Like, I'm just going to go in, and your cabin is right in front of you, and the light is on, and it looks nice and warm, and you're cold, and you're getting battered by these waves. Like, so it's very tempting, and then you get a few rib shots. You're like, I'm just going to go in and sleep, and call it a day, and we'll get up and fight another day tomorrow. And yeah, I suppose that word there is what every day is just a fight. The ocean is just a monster. It just keeps knocking you down. You finally feel you're in a good position, and then she'll throw something up that'll knock you down, and you just have to find a way to drag yourself back up and continue the fight.
But how do you physically and mentally prepare for that?
Physically, again,
please don't tell me you only rowed like 1,000 meters.
No, I rowed a lot, because I kind of like rowing as well. So I do a lot of work on the indoor, the ergometer, the indoor rower. I actually compete on that, so it's something I have a kind of love-hate relationship with. So I did a lot of work on that, did all my kind of fast stuff on that, and it's very mentally challenging as well, so you have to have some really good mental processes in place. So that relates really well back into what you do out in the ocean. And then I built up all my volume by just bringing the boat out on Galway Bay and just putting in the hours out there. So worked up from the first day I brought it out. I was probably the first day I brought it up was down the Claddagh, and it was a bit of a disaster actually. I didn't know what I was doing. I actually put the boat into the pier wall at one stage. Yeah, I know. I couldn't figure out, because it was foot steering and rowing at the same time. It's a bit like driving a car, that when you're not used to it, those two concentrations are really hard to work. So,
had you ever been on the water like a boatman before?
No, no maritime or nothing.
Like, it's mad. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the most challenging things of the whole thing, just trying to pick up the language around that world. I had no idea. I'll tell you a good story. I went out to the start of the race the year Gavin did it in 2016, 2017. And there was only 12 boats in that year's race. And I was standing between Gav's boat before they put them in the water. Gav's boat and a girl called Elaine from Scotland, who was another solo. And the two of them were chatting to each other. And I was there. I didn't have a Scoobies what they were on about, And Gav says to Elaine, "She just got the hull of your boat, Elaine, didn't you? And then you did all the work on it." And I'm there thinking, I don't even know what a hull of a boat is here. Like, I know. It's very overwhelming at times, but I think if it means enough to you, you figure out a way to you figure out a way to make it happen. So I kind of picked up all that on the way. But that first day down the Claddagh I had to get two local fishermen to help me put the boat in the water. The Olivers down there, and they were a great help. But one of them came out in the boat with me, and he ended up steering then in the end, and I just ended up rowing, because he can do hand steering as well in these boats. So that was after me putting it into the pier head, or the pier wall. But after that, then I became more comfortable, and you figure it out. And after I kind of built up to, I did a 25-hour row out to the Aran Islands, slept out just before Inishmaan, and then came back in one night, and one morning. So that was the longest I did on the water, and that's kind of how I built up any volume. But to be honest, that's not really training. Like, the only thing you're training there is sitting down for 25 hours, really. Like, I mean...
But what about the sores on your hands and your legs? How did you protect them, or did you build up, like... the way you get a welt on your hand if you're doing a bit of gardening at home. But if you're going to be rowing for 63 days, how do you protect your hands?
So I'd be lucky enough. I'd have quite a few of those just from like deadlifting and chin-ups and that sort of stuff. I'd have some hard skin there and callus. So now that all that been said, they did rip off on day one of the row, because kind of everything went wrong that could go wrong on day one, and they were the first things to go. And then my heels tore, my blistered, and then I got seasick pretty bad, and then I got some sort of weird cramping, almost spasms in all my major muscle groups in my lower body. And that was just down to a mistake in my preparation. Basically, I tapered way too early in my preparation. So I had this idea that, like, because it was 18 months preparation, and I put a lot of value and time into that preparation. I felt like I needed a longer taper. So I had it penciled in for 2 weeks, and then I went down and I competed in the Irish Indoor Rowing Championships, and I did really well, personally for myself. And I kind of felt, listen, you're in a great place. I think I had like 4 days left in my training program, or 5 days. And I was kind of going, what's the point in doing another 5 days? Why don't you just give yourself that, little bit more of a window to recover before you take on the row? And then so that meant I was up now to 2 weeks and 5 days, and then the row got pushed back 2 days because of weather conditions, the start, sorry. So that meant 3 weeks without doing anything. So basically my body had detrained and gone a bit soft. And then I took off out the blocks, and if you imagine like something that's so important to you, you have all the that adrenaline and emotion of starting something. I said goodbye to my parents, and it's a big event, the big crowds come off and see you out, so you're absolutely pumped, so I took off out the blocks, and I was the last boat to leave, and I tore out and I passed out about 4 boats, and I was flying it, and then bang, my body just started to shut down, and those are the first things to go, the calluses. And I couldn't work it out. I was questioning it and not finding any answers for ages, because my body is like the thing, my whole adult life is the thing I've used to drive it, and it's been my rock, and then it goes wrong, and I was just like, what the hell's happening? It goes wrong at the worst possible time, the biggest thing you've ever taken on. So that was really, really dark, that time. But I don't know how to answer your question about how did I build up, I suppose, a resistance to those sort of things. You just a bit of time on the oars helps. But after that, after those calluses went, I started using gloves after that for, like, I suppose the next at least a month, if not 5 weeks, and just to give myself that layer of protection away from the wooden handles on the oars.
And how did you pull yourself out of that dark place?
So
you really had to keep going.
Believe it or not, things got worse after that. Stuff. Yeah, this is the what would you say? This is the worst kind of state I've ever found myself in, mentally and physically. So after about 6 hours and all that physical stuff was going wrong, I had a bit of a dilemma, because as the physical stuff was going wrong, the Mother Nature started to challenge me as well, and basically the winds and the currents got it pushed into the bow of the boat, into the front. So now, from going about 2 knots, which is a steady, nice pace, I was going down to 0.3 of a knot. So I literally crawling, into those headwinds, into those currents. Those boats don't go very fast, especially when you're a solo rower. So, like, with my body kind of just falling down around me and getting seasick, and these spasms that, quads, hammies and calves all spasming at the same time. You can't stretch one of them, so
and you probably don't have the space to stretch them.
No, and you're on obviously an uneven surface, and you're a lot of chop at that stage, getting away from the island. So yeah, it was crazy. So I kind of had to, so I made the decision anyway. So do I keep rowing but not give myself a window to kind of recuperate, or do I go into the cabin and try and get a bit of recovery, a bit of sleep, but maybe get blown back? So that's the decision I came to. So I gave myself 45 minutes on my alarm, went in, slept, and got up, and I'd been blown back a mile against those headwinds and those currents. So that was obviously a blow. It wasn't completely unexpected, but still, you can still see the island there, so it's not exactly encouraging, yeah. But I did feel slightly better, the spasms didn't seem to be as severe, and I felt I could row a little bit. So I rowed, and the plan I made was I'll row back to the waypoint I saw before I went to sleep. Now, the waypoints are GPS coordinates, basically, and that's how we plot our way across the ocean. So I said I'll row back, and it was 42.2 kilometres to the next waypoint. Sorry.
Sure, it was a marathon.
Yeah, exactly. Nice, easy number to remember. And I said, once I get there, it'll be kind of the evening night of day one, and I'll put out a thing called a power anchor, which is it's an anchor you use when the ground anchor and the sea is too deep and the ground anchor won't reach the bottom. It's a big parachute, sits out the front of the boat and holds about 2 tons of water in it. So that was the plan. So it took me 3 hours to make back up that mile I lost into those headwinds, and it was around 9 or 10 o'clock. And there's a lot of faff involved in the power anchor. There's 120 metres of retrieval line. There's 90 metres of line. So I finally got it out, and kind of around 11 midnight, and went to bed. I went into the cabin, kind of, I suppose, ready to face another day and confident like tomorrow will be a better day. You'll hopefully have recuperated a little bit, got some composure back mentally and physically, and we'll kick on from day 2, right? We'll forget this nightmare. So I did that, went to sleep, woke up at 5 that morning, looked at the GPS. I'd be blown back 1.5 miles overnight.
Oh no.
Yeah. So now, like, I was in all sorts of turmoil. There was quite a bit of chop outside, so I went outside and I was just trying to figure shit out.
Could you still see the island?
Yeah. I mean, I was still very, very close to that. So I remember leaning over the side of the boat, and there's kind of waves coming over the side, and you're getting soaked, and you're pulling in this anchor, and I was just going, wow, what is happening? I just couldn't get any answers. I was incredibly negative, incredibly destructive thoughts. You know, you're thinking about all sorts of things that aren't helping you, and this is where the mental side of my training really helps, you know. So I feel I have really good awareness, and awareness is a huge part of mental strength, right? So you have to be aware of your thoughts. If you're not aware of them, you can't change them. So my awareness kicks in, you know, you're incredibly negative and destructive. So I sat down on the little seat on my boat, and I asked myself 3 questions. So what are you here to do? Row the Atlantic. Okay, yeah. And how do you do that? Well, you fucking row. And like, what good is another second, hour, day, you know, minute spent here feeling sorry for yourself, lamenting your misfortunes and your mistakes in preparation, and, you know, with the goal of rowing the Atlantic? And the answer was none. So I just rowed into those headwinds. I rowed for 7 hours straight, took an hour off, and then I rowed for another 7 hours. And finally, at about 6 p.m. on the evening of day 2, the winds shifted into my stern, into the back of my boat, and started to push me away, and my race was finally on. And I only made 10 miles in that 15 hours period, 14 of which I rowed. To give you context, if I was in the middle of the ocean and I rowed for 14 hours and 15, I'd make probably 50 miles.
Wow.
So that's how slow I was going. But I just kept controlling what I could control, which was rowing. Row. And finally I started to get pushed away from the islands. And and then in hindsight, that awareness period, having the awareness of being negative and asking myself those 3 questions, saved my race, because there was 2 other solos in the exact same position as me, going forward, getting blown back, going forward, getting blown back, going forward, getting blown back. And they didn't get up on the morning day 2. Well, they did, but they didn't row for 14 of the next 15 hours. I don't know how long they rowed, but they never got away from the island. They got pulled back in after day 2 and day 3 by local fishermen.
Wow.
So their races, in one case, one guy put like 2 years work into it, was gone in the matter of 72 hours. So yeah, I chatted to him afterwards, and he says the most soul destroying period of his life. You know, he said he jettisoned everything off the boat to try and be able. His boat was a bit heavier than mine, in fairness to him. He jettisoned like literally everything he could spare to get the boat lighter so he could row into those headwinds, but he said he couldn't do it. So yeah, so you know, it's amazing. Like, you know, when I look back on my preparation period, having put myself in all those really dark spots on the ergometer, on the watt bike, whatever it may be, like that all came back in that moment. That practice in those processes and those questioning and being aware of my thoughts in really tough times came back to save the biggest thing I've ever taken on, you know.
Other than crossing the finish line of the race, what was the highlight over the 63 days?
So a bit strange with ocean rowing, because like what you might consider lowlights are kind of looking back are the highlights, you know. So the day I double capsized,
it's a highlight.
Yeah, it's a highlight. Yeah, that was day 14. It was like the craziest day of my life, because in between the 2 capsizes, the first one of which I was asleep in the cabin, and the first I knew about it was when I was like catapulted at I don't know what sort of speed into the side of the cabin, splitting my head open, and as the boat's going around 360 degrees, so imagine that you're trying to figure out what's this pain, why I've been woken up, what's this liquid running down my face, and you're in a tumble dryer at the same time, and then I went out on deck, and literally every cubic centimetre of the deck was covered in water, so I was like panicking, going, is this going to sink the boat? And I was like bucketing stuff off, and I had the bilge pump on, which gets that water off as well. So I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of a little bit in shock, I suppose, and then you're super hypersensitive out there to anything different, and I hear this noise which I'd never heard before, so I was on it like a shot, and I look over to my right and I see a dorsal fin of a whale.
Oh, mother of God.
Yeah. And the whale, now it was only a little adolescent whale, but a minke whale I think it was, and it came around the boat, circled the boat about 5 times, and then on like 4th or 5th rotation it stuck its left eye in the air and made eye contact with me. I know, yeah. I was like, nobody's going to believe this. And then a few hours after that, I kept thinking, because it was in a big storm, we were in 10-metre waves this day, like that's why I was capsized earlier and why I went over again, so like 9-10-metre waves. So all day I'm properly on the edge of my seat, for want of a better expression, just survival mode. I kept thinking I saw the whale was following me and trying to communicate with me in some way. I don't know. This is what I was telling myself anyway.
Huh? Maybe he was minding.
Yeah. It's amazing what the stories you tell yourself out there. And then I went over again later on that afternoon when I was standing up on the boat, and I ended up just grabbing a handle behind my back instinctively, because I knew the wave was. I was just the boat was on a bad place on the wave, and I was on the face of the wave just underneath the break, and I was on a bad place on the boat, so I just grabbed the handle and I went in the water, and I literally hung on with one hand the whole way under the water, the whole 180 degrees, until the boat self-righted, which these boats are designed to do, and came kind of flat back on my back on the floor, on the open rowing deck. Very, very, very relieved person. Yeah.
You're not enticing me to look at the whiskey challenge as something that we might do. Oh my God. I don't know how that could have been a highlight, obviously, except for the fact that you were alive at the end of it, and getting to meet. Did you name the whale? Did you give him a name?
No, I never saw him again after that. I had pods of dolphins after that, and a couple of sea turtles, and like loads of bird life, who I'd often have conversations with, not afraid to say. But I never saw the whale again, unfortunately. I think I saw a tiger shark as well, close to the Caribbean. Just whatever way I was surfing down a wave, and the sun was shining over my shoulder, and it just hit the water beside me, and just saw this enormous shadow, like bigger than the boat, which is 7 meters underneath the water. And it wasn't until afterwards I was like, wow, what was that? Unreal. And then it wasn't until afterwards I kind of realised that was probably a tiger shark, or a shark anyway. So.
And you mentioned the sun quite a bit as well. So how do you protect your skin from the sun? I mean, sun cream obviously doesn't do the job out there, does it?
Well, it would do, but if you had somebody to put it on areas you can't reach, so...
You didn't put like a sheepskin rug on the bottom like Gavin Hennigan did on his
No,
boat,
I really regretted that. I got
Yeah.
really, really bad sea sores and pressure sores. So that was probably one of the hardest parts of the whole thing, trying to deal with them, and, thinking, how long have I left here? You've thousands of miles left in when they first started to get really bad. And you just kept thinking they're just going to get worse and worse and worse. So that was a mistake of mine. I made many mistakes, but listen, that's one I won't make again if I do another ocean row.
How do you break down the distance? I mean, it's one thing to do 6 marathons in 6 days. You can break each race down into smaller parts, and then each day becomes another little bigger part. But with ocean rowing, you've thousands of kilometres to cover. How do you take a chunk out of the elephant?
I didn't do it this way, but I've heard people break it down into thirds, like 900, because it's 2,700 nautical miles. So they break it down into 900. That's it? Yeah, 900 miles. But I suppose my first part, so you get sent these waypoints by your weather router. So I had a guy back in Scotland looking at about 8 weather systems and trying to decipher by my little quadrant what would be the best direction to row in due to winds and waves and that. So he sends me these things called waypoints, and they're basically GPS coordinates, like I said earlier. Now, the first one was grand. It was only like 50 kilometres. But then I think the next one he sent me was like 300. And the one after that was 1,300 nautical miles. Yeah. So it's pretty hard to break that down. Like, so do you know what? For me, I just try and be as present as possible. Now, it's a constant battle, this. Like, it's the ideal scenarios, you're, absolutely present and concentrating on your effort or your technique or your talk or your breath. But unless you're some sort of Hindu or Buddhist monk, like, that's just not going to be sustainable. So what happens is you do become outcome oriented, and you do start thinking about, well, how long did I row today? How long is left? So basically every day then I just started writing down how much I rowed that day, and then kind of trying to add it up. And it's a constant mental battle, because that is not the perfect mental state to be in. That adds pressure that you don't really need, but it's the most human thing we do. So the battle is between kind of redirecting from becoming outcome orientated, coming concentrated on the numbers, back to being present. You lose that concentration, you go back to the numbers, and then you're constantly fighting to get back, and it's just a constant battle. And the better you can become at staying in that present moment and concentrated on something, the easier it is mentally, but it's not so easy. So I've heard some people talk about just going into a daydreaming state as well, that they find that quite good. Or, I often did sang, believe it or not.
Are you a good singer?
I'm absolutely atrocious, and I don't even know what I was singing about. I'd start singing about my day, like literally what I've done, just something, like anything, because I had no. I started having battery power problems, and then I couldn't put on my music, and I couldn't listen to any sort of podcasts or anything like that. So it was just me. That was it, just me with me. So sometimes there's only so much you can kind of put up with those voices in your head and yourself. So sometimes you have to get out of that state. So singing about anything, or just talking to birds. If somebody had seen me, they probably thought I
somebody
lost
recorded
it. He's
you.
absolutely
quite
lost
interesting
it.
Podcast recording it, going the whole way across. Talk to me about the last few hours before you got to the finish line, and then that celebration on the finish line. Did you ever think you'd see it?
I think I always... Okay, there was times where it was, the last thing I was thinking about was the finish. I was thinking about fighting every day, fighting. But so the first thing I saw was 35 nautical miles from the finish. That night I could see the lights from the island, which was Antigua, where I was trying to finish. So obviously that was huge, and then I can't remember, I think I was trying to work out the time I would... Yeah, that's right. I was trying to work out the timing of the day I would finish, So I knew if I put down the hammer, I'd probably finish in daylight. So I rowed quite a bit into that night, and then I slept a little bit and got up the next day, and obviously it was a bit closer. And then I remember from like about 20 miles, I think you can, during the day you can see land, so that's when I first could see it. And the next 12 hours, like, that land seemed to get no closer. Like, it was like, am I going anywhere here? What's happening? Like, finally it starts to get a bit bigger, which is a nice bit of encouragement. And eventually, you get pretty close. And then all I could see was, as I got close to the island, was these waves smashing on these seawalls, And I had all sorts of...
Your steering was gone at this stage.
Steering was gone, but also was all the power in my sat phone. I lost my two sat phones to really bad weather, and I didn't really know the finish process, because you kind of come in from the north of the island, you have to swing round to the south and kind of go into a harbour called Nelson's Dockyard. So I was kind of panicking about that, and the last I talked to one of the Coast Guard guys, he was telling me just go to this waypoint, but the waypoint they were showing me was on land, so I was like, well, I'm not, there's no way I've come 3,000 nautical miles to put the boat onto the seawall, and ruin this whole thing, So I stayed out quite a bit from the island. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't know that, if I stayed out too far, I'd be pushed past the island. I couldn't get back far enough north, against the current. So Thankfully, they send out, the Coast Guard send out a rib to guide you in, but they couldn't find me because I was so far out for a while. Eventually, they find me and they say, mate, you have to row due north. So the next 25 minutes was me putting down the hammer, properly rowing as hard as I could not against the currents, but if I'd gone any further south, I would have been in trouble. And eventually I got into close enough to the sea wall, and then I was safe, and then I just kind of came around into the harbour, and then you eventually cross the finish line, and this big flotilla of locals and anyone who's kind of been following the race come out, and all sorts of things, like from pedlos to stand-up surfboards to, you know, ribs to anything, and they kind of follow you in. And then there's an official finish line where you've rowed the Atlantic, and then you have another kind of 15-minute row or 10-minute row into the harbour, into the dock, where like there's a kind of big event and your family are waiting, and it's a big crowd, a little crowd, but it's nice, really, really nice. And you go through this harbour, and of course, now remember, I haven't seen anything. I'm in completely dishevelled state. I lost 28 kilos at this stage. Big beard, tan in my life, but like I look like your man from Castaway, Tom Hanks. And I haven't seen really anything much bar horizon and a bit of bird life for like 63 days. And then you row into this harbour, and all there is like million and billion dollar boats, you know, proper playground of the rich and famous. And they all come out on all the crews of those come out onto deck, and the captains blow the horn, or somebody blows the horns. So you have all this, it's completely overwhelming, you know, and you're like, wow, you know, it's bizarre. But then you get in, and I obviously saw my family there on the dock before I got off, and I saw Andrew, my brother, who wasn't meant to be there. So I was completely, I suppose, overtaken by the emotion of it all, and seeing how much it meant to them. Was just class. What a kind of experience and memories we made, you know, just as a family, just over that little period of time, you know, the arrival and then the next kind of week together in Antigua. You know, I said recently to someone, I never told people I loved them as much in all my life over those next few days, you know, because you're just so, you don't give a crap, like you've just gone through the ringer, you know. I mean, it's like everything, all your layers are stripped away, and you're just a different person for a little while. Unfortunately, that state doesn't stick around too long, but there's a little bit of it inside you anyway. You've experienced it and lived it, you know.
Probably giving them a few more hugs every time you see them, instead of telling them we love them. Sure, it's the same thing with you, isn't it?
Exactly.
You said, I've seen somewhere where you said it was a hell of an experience, hell of an adventure, and a hell of a challenge. It was exactly what I wanted from the challenge. I wanted to be pushed to my limits mentally and physically, and I sure got what I wanted and then some. Would you do it again?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually planning to do another one for 2021. One back here from New York to Galway, but not alone this time. I want to put together a boat of either 4 Galwegians or 2 Galwegians or Irishmen. You know, we'll see. I've done the solo adventure and it was amazing, but I saw when I did it, you know, I saw kind of those teams as well, and it's probably something that I couldn't get from the experience, you know. So that's I would love to have that challenge with other people and share that experience, and you know, all the different dynamics that brings, good and bad.
Yeah, that'd be some incredible spin back from New York to the Aran Islands or to Galway. Would you come into Blackrock?
I'd love to come into Galway, into the docks. Imagine,
that'd be amazing.
And get, you know, maybe get the whole town, if not the whole country, following it. And
has it ever been done before?
It's only been done 5 times, as in by pairs, by 2-man. It's been done a bit more by 4-man boats, but it's much less. It's a much less trodden ocean path because of the extremes of it. It's so the big change, of course, is in the southern Atlantic, the one I already did. It's warm most of the time. Up there it's cold, and that's a big challenge. And then getting away from North America is quite challenging. You go through the place called Grand Banks, which is, you know, big fishing area, very foggy, so there's power issues. So there's different challenges to it, but I just think, you know, there's not many people situated in the world that you can actually row into your hometown. And since I suppose I am an ocean rower now, I might as well.
Was that a label you put on yourself there?
Well, I've actually done that, so I'm kind of comfortable taking that label.
Before we finish up, I have a few more minutes left because, you weren't happy to just do the Marathon des Sables and then row the ocean. You've now decided you're going to complete the 7 peaks, the 7 summits. So you've already done Anaconga, Denali, Kilimanjaro, Elbrus and Punkak Yaya, if that's how you pronounce it. So you have Vinson and Everest left to do. I mean, what is going on? Do you not rest at all?
I mean, life is ticking away,
I know, but
I'm not going to...
would you not take a break for a couple of weeks or maybe a year and just chill out and have the crack?
Definitely not for a year anyway. But I do, every time I come off one of these mountains, for example, I just came off, you called it Punka Yaya, I call it Karsten's Pyramid, it's the same thing, but you like the traditional indigenous name, I like that. But, I took 3 weeks after that, I took in Indonesia and Cambodia, just to I felt like the last kind of year pursuing these mountains was really intense, so I just felt like I needed a little bit of a break, so I just kind of decompressed there and give myself a little bit of space and freedom to think, and then came back with Everest firmly in my targets for next year. So
you went to spend 5 weeks travelling around the Caribbean because you needed some alone time.
Yeah, that's right. Well, alone time. I felt like I needed to process the whole role and what I went through. Now, I was completely delusional to think that I could do it in that time, but it was nice, a nice period of time to give myself some self-reflection and, also see some new countries. Because, coming back to that list I mentioned at the time, another one of my goals is to visit every country. A lifetime goal is to visit every country in the world. So it was a nice kind of add-on that I could kind of get to 5 or 6 different Caribbean countries while I was there, and use that time to kind of just analyse and reflect and try and process what I'd been through. But so I do take little periods off after these kind of adventures, but I'm very conscious that I'm also very conscious that I absolutely love preparing for these, and I love the that period as well. So I'm always trying to get back into preparing for something. It gives me great direction and drive towards something, in life. So, so then I came, so off the back of that, I've 5 of myself, the 7 summits done. I did Kilimanjaro actually way back when I was still playing rugby in 2013. So I'm counting that. I got to the summit. It was hard enough the first time, so I'm not going back again. And then in the last 13 months, I got Elbrus, Aconcagua, Denali, and Karsten's Pyramid or Puchiyanka done. So delighted, 2 of those mountains, Denali and Aconcagua, are notoriously fickle with weather. And, you could go back 2 or 3 years in a row and not get up either of them, So for me to get up both of them within sight, I did one in January and one in May, was massive, because if Mother Nature doesn't want you to get to the top, you're not getting to the top no matter who you are. So that was great.
There's a whole other podcast we can do on your 7 summits
quite possibly,
down the line when you're done. So you've put Vincent on the back foot for the moment and are going straight for Everest.
Yeah, the original plan was Vincent to do in January 2020 and then to finish with Everest April, May 2020. But I've had to drop Vincent now because these things are just really, really expensive, and I've already poured quite a lot of my own money into the previous 4 mountains, 5 really. And now we get to the 2. There's a reason these 2 were left to the end, is because they're super expensive. They're around the same price each, so I can't afford that at the moment. So I've dropped Vincent and just given myself 7 months to kind of try and bring Everest together, and Everest is like a kind of 50 grand price tag as well. So yeah, it's tough going that side of things. Are you
self-funded completely? Have you any sponsors?
I have. Up until now I've been self-funded, but I'm out there at the moment trying to make some good sponsors and partnerships for Everest, and for 7 summits generally. It's tough work, but it's a challenge as well, and I kind of enjoy the challenge, even though we hasn't been hugely successful yet in bringing in any sponsors. But we'll keep working away on it, and I think there's great. Personally, of course, I do think this, but I think there's great value there for partnerships and for sponsors, and I think it's only a matter of time before we bring in some.
And if somebody wants to support your 7 summits, where can they find out more information about what you're doing?
The best place is DamianBrowne.com. It's my website, and it's been redeveloped actually at the moment, and it should be live this week, the new version, the redeveloped version. So there'll be loads of information on there about all the values in our sponsorship packages and me generally and what I've done in the past. And yeah, so that's the best place, DamianBrowne.com.
And aside from all of the adventures, of course, you're back on the rugby pitch with the Galwegians.
Yeah. So post rugby, I decided to take like 2 years off. It ended up kind of been 3 years away from rugby. I just needed to do something else and refresh. It'd been so intense for 16 plus years. So last year I went back coaching, and this year I'm back in my actual club. That's kind of where I started, Galwegians, up with the under 18 and a halves. And it's going great. We're only together, well, I'm only together with the group like about 4.5 weeks now, but we've won our first match, which is a good start, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's really an important age grade, and it's really important for me to kind of translate or teach them some of the stuff I've learned over my life, not just through rugby, but adventures and just generally in life. So, I think you can pass on a lot of valuable stuff to them at a really good age. So, yeah, it's been great so far.
Who's been the biggest influence in your life to date, Damian, do you think?
So I had a coach, firstly, when I kind of came out of school and went into rugby, pro rugby, called John Kingston. He was actually the coach of Galwegians at the time, and this was when Connacht Rugby wasn't I was with Connacht Rugby, but it was only like for half the season, and then you spend half the season with your club. So we had a lot of time with our club coaches, and club rugby, AIL rugby at that time was really, really big. And he had a huge impact on me. I was 18, 19, the 2 years he was there, and he was actually coming from a professional environment with Richmond in the UK. And I can't remember how he ended up in Galway, but something happened in Richmond. The club folded, financial pressures, and I think he just needed a break from he's an Englishman, London guy originally, and he just needed a break from London. So he decided to come to the west of Ireland for a couple of years. Smart man, I think we'll all agree. And he had a massive impact on me. He just taught me the value of hard work and commitment and taking responsibility and ownership of your own shit. And and I think those lessons are invaluable, like looking back and reflecting on where I've got to. There'd be big questions. Would I be where I'm at if it hadn't been for him? Are you proud of what you've achieved? Sure, yeah. I think I'm proud of the person I've become. I feel very at ease and content in myself, and I've become that way by constantly pushing myself towards things that scare me, make me uncomfortable, and I think that requires some good values, and when you're doing that, you're constantly sharpening those values, because values dull is, no matter what type of person you are. So I like to try and keep mine sharp. So yeah, I'm proud of that. And that's why I think that pride is a healthy pride. So that's why I keep pushing towards these things, because I know how far I've come and what it means to me and what it's done to me, and it'll keep doing that going forward. Well, Damian, I'm delighted you joined us here today and took some time out from your own busy life to come and join us on the show. It's surely been very, very insightful, and I know we didn't really touch on the 7 summits because we kind of ran over time a good bit, but I definitely want to get you back in studio, and I want to have a chat about that, because I think there's a whole other side that we haven't even heard about yet, and that will be of huge interest to listeners from all over the world. Huge thanks to Galway Bay FM for the use of their studio to record this episode, and thanks again to everybody for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, please take a minute or two to give us a review on Apple Podcasts and on the Facebook page Try Talking Sport. For more information and to check out our previous episodes, log on to www.trytalkingsport.com. You can also subscribe for free across all podcast platforms. Until next time, thanks for listening.